Okay, today I'd like to welcome everyone to the Atheist Society. Um, we don't have any members, but we do have a mailing list. We don't have an exact definition of atheism. Regarding the talk, if we can let the speaker finish, and then we'll have question and answer later, unless there's points of clarification. And so today, for our May lecture, May the 8th, well, I'd like to welcome Hein Kyaw, who's been a speaker before. Welcome him back. And today he's going to speak on the topic of decolonize anti-woke atheism beyond Western values. So over to you, Hein.
Yeah, thank you. I will share my screen. That won't be long. So the topics for today is decolonize the anti-woke atheism. The idea is that like these days we are seeing a lot of so-called anti-woke atheists in the West, and their main argument is that the atheism itself is a product of Western thoughts, and the Western values needs to be protected. By Western value, they are trying to portray as feminism, maybe LGBTQ rights, and so on. So now we are trying to examine whether if there is any truth in their argument or not. So we have to understand what's religion in the first place to understand the whole idea of the debate going on within the Atheist Society. I mean, not the Atheist Society as the organization, as I meant in the community itself. So we have to understand what is religion. So religion can be a lot of meanings. Like it could be something different for Judaism. It could be something different for Buddhism. It could be something different for Hinduism. So that could be a really broad subject to define. But every religion share the characteristics. So like, for example, if you try to understand the metaphysics, they normally talk about revelations. They normally talk about consciousness. Like, for example, like Abrahamic religion, they only talk about revelations, like what God tells you, what prophet brings, to the table, so on and so on. And if you talk about Dharmic religions like Hinduism, Buddhism, they talk about consciousness. They talk about like how they got enlightened, how they got the mythical, the knowledge and so on. So how do they get this understanding of this metaphysics? So that comes with the epistemology. So their epistemology is so unique. It's so simple as well. It is all about dogma. It's all about doctrines. Like my book says this, so it has to be correct. Your book says that, so your book has to be wrong. Something like that. So that's their best version of epistemology. And when it comes to morality, it is all presented by or maybe manufactured by some random dude in the sky. So it's like if we quote Christopher Hitchens on that, the morality of the religion is almost just like some random guy in North Korea in the totalitarian regime kind of thing. So religion is so simple to understand in that context. So we are always proud of Western values, Western world. So what is it about? So after all, it is about age of enlightenment. I was listening to Sam Harris, I was listening to Jordan Peterson, I was listening to a lot of the anti-woke atheists on YouTube, on Twitter. Whatever they are saying against the so-called wokeism in these days, they are always referring to Western values. And whenever they try to bring up this words like Western value, it is all about age of enlightenment. So we have to go back to the classics. Like when we read John Luke, it is all about empiricism. It's like it is all about how we can understand the society by learning from it, like from the experience. And to understand that, it is about God, how we can have the bodies and intelligence and so on. So we could safely assume that the age of enlightenment, especially when it comes to John Locke, it is not entirely atheism. It was more about deism kind of understanding of the nature. It is not entirely materialism. It is a mix of materialism and idealism. It is some sort of like inclusivism. And when it came to Immanuel Kant, it is a bit different. He was more attracted to rationalism, but he was also criticizing the pure reason as well. And he has this interesting term that he used called transcendental idealism. So he doesn't normally care about consequences. He talks more about duty and moralities. So we could easily say that he doesn't really care about the results. He care more about the rhetoric. He care more about the duty and moral values. That's what they are referring to, the Western values, by a lot of these anti-woke atheists. So Age of Enlightenment doesn't really end there. It goes beyond that. So we have a really interesting trend in the philosophy around that time. We could say post Age of Enlightenment. It is not the strand of Age of Enlightenment as well, but it is not a different time as well. It is within that duration. We have Karl Marx. He tried to understand metaphysics question by using materialism. And his method of understanding things is what he called dialectical materialism. So he understands the morality in the sense of the proletariat morality. So he always trying to criticize the bourgeoisie morality, which he meant the rich class, the capitalist class, and so on. And on the other hand, we have the opposite side, which is really similar in understanding the metaphysics, because she also, like Ayn Rand, she also used a similar method to understand the metaphysical questions. She tried to understand it by understanding the objective reality. And the method she uses what we call reason. It's a pure reason. If it doesn't make sense, she don't believe it. And her morality is quite simple. It is rational egoism. It has to serve the individual. Otherwise, she don't really care about doing something. And she was referring to free market capitalism as a solution for the society. And after that, all we know that we have postmodern, we have Nietzsche, Camus, so on. And then we have the Nazi regimes and so on. So that's where every philosophical trends change the nature. Now we have to understand colonialism, to understand what we meant by decolonize. Because it seems like in the Western world, especially when we talk about colonialism, it is all about Christian colonialism. We also have to talk about Islamist colonialism as well. Like Christian colonialism, it is not inherently related to Jesus Christ. He was not a colonialist by any definition. He was just a bohemian kind of individualist guy who preached about loving the neighbor, feeding the poor, and so on. But something different is happening in the Middle East after a few centuries. Prophet Muhammad, he led and participated in military battles by himself, and he spread his religion through wars, through diplomacy, and through alliance. And after that, that's the time where we can see a lot of Christian colonialism. That's the time where Spain, Portuguese, French, Britains, they got the military power, and they got the establishment of trade routes towards Asia and Africa. And along the way, the Christianity was also imported to these regions. So especially in 19th century to 20th centuries, we can see the heaps of the imperialist attempt towards the Africa and Asia. The World War I, the World War II, a lot of invasions, a lot of colonial agendas, a lot of colonialism, but not in terms of military anymore. It's more about economic prosperity. And even in areas like Australia, New Zealand, we got a lot of settler colonialism and so on. And all of these are inherently tied to Christian values, Christian society, Catholic organizations, Christian missionaries, and so on. And there are movements nowadays to stand against these. That's what they call decolonize, decolonial. And we could reference to Frantz Fanon. He was talking about how the economic system and political system are inherently linked to colonialism, and also about psychological and cultural process. Like in his book, Black Skin and White Marks, The Rags of the App, He was talking about even a person of color could behave like the colonizers and so on. But there is a catch on this theory after all, because this theory itself is mainly rooted in the Western atmosphere. So what happened is every studies are done in the West, which leads to the expat problem. A lot of the Western academics, they became the expert in the issue, and really limited amount of that war are revolutionaries or researchers can only access these informations and data. And that's kind of problematic issue as well. Now we have to talk about the real world cases of these issues. So when you read about decolonization, post-colonialism, produced by most of the Western leftists or Western academics these days, they all talk about Christianity as the only and main source of colonialism. And they only talk about white people as the only and the main source of colonialism. Is it true? That we have to understand from that war perspective. So we have a real situation going on at the moment. For example, in Malaysia, there is a water festival called Songkran. It is an indigenous festival. It is tied to the Malaysia and Thailand and Myanmar as well, and even also extend to China. A lot of indigenous community participate that festival. But in Malaysia, it is no longer possible because a lot of Islamists are attacking that and saying it is haram to do that. Even though Malaysia is a secular country in the paper, it couldn't really protect the festival. It is really, it is an attack. So that is a form of colonialism. That is a cultural genocide. It's going on and no one really cares about it. And it is not limited to Saudi Asia. You can also see that kind of behavior in Africa. There are a lot of traditional practices that are targeted by Islamists and also Christians, of course. So we have to understand about the Western issues as well. Like when people talk about anti-woke, they talk about genders. Like they talk about the abstractity of many genders and so on. Is it even true that we have to examine? So I was referring to the quotes here. I don't want to like just read it out here, but I will just share the presentation slides to you as well. And the main idea of the quote here is without the gender binary, a lot of the hierarchy, a lot of the underpinnings of the social injustices like homophobia, lesbian phobia, transphobia, and so on, they will cease to exist. If we don't talk about the gender binary anymore, they will cease to exist. That's the main idea of the quote. And we have to understand where this two gender idea comes from. Mostly that comes from the religious values. Like, for example, in Christianity, it says God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. That is from Genesis. And also, it was not only about gender, like two genders. Whenever there is two genders, there is also patriarchy coming along with it, because it has to make a hierarchy of genders. So all the time, man has to be on the top. That is how religions produce the gender colonialism kind of things. So even in Bible, it says that the head of woman is man and the head of Christ is God, which clearly stated that men are the guardians of woman. That is in Bible. Also, it is the same for Islamist religion as well. So in Quran 49:13, we can see we created you from male and female, make you into people, tribes, so that you may get to know each other, which was basically stating only male and female. It's only two genders. And then it also follows the same pattern. Men are the caretaker of women, as men have been provisioned by Allah over women. Tax was supporting them. And it doesn't really stop there. It is posing women to be obedient, to be like a slave kind of person. It says righteous women are devotedly obedient and one alone protective. So that's how they create the concepts. Like, first of all, it's a sort of idea of two genders only, the binary gender. And then they made a hierarchy of genders. And man has to be on the top, woman has to be beneath the man. That's how they produce. And as I mentioned clearly before, that colonialism has its roots in both Christian society and Islamic societies. So of course, it comes along to the other regions where they were colonized. So for example, there were a lot of indigenous beliefs that were tolerant or that accept non-binary genders. For example, if we look at North America, there is a concept called two-spirit. That's a pan-Indian term, which means like an individual, he could have both masculine and feminine spirits, and they were not targeted. They were not persecuted. In Christian and Islam, the gay people, lesbian people, they were always targeted. For example, like in Islam, there is a verse saying that you have to take out those who people like do the same thing that Prophet or Lot did, and you have to stone them, take them out of the house. Basically, it means if they do homosexual acts, you have to drag them out of their house, stone them to death. That's what basically it was saying. That it is not the same thing for the indigenous culture of a lot of different groups. For example, like the one in North America, the two-spirit people, they were highly respected as the spiritual leaders, healers, artists, and mediators. And that's really revolutionary. Because even today, even in the West and even in the global South, most of the gay people, lesbian and homosexuals and queer and trans, they are mainly targeted. But in the past, before the colonial power of Islamist colonialism and the Christian colonialism, they were highly respected as spiritual leaders. That's really interesting facts. And that's not limited to North America. You can see the similar culture in South Asia as well. We call that Hijra, that gender in countries like India, which we used to call Hindustan in the past. So they normally hold specific roles in the religious ceremonies, like blessing newborns, babies, and so on. They are normally male, but they dress like female and they dance around, and they could include intersex individuals as well. So they were not targeted at all. They were celebrated. They were like highly respected because only the highly respected people can host the religious ceremonies at those times. And that's not limited to only those countries too. We can see similar culture in Southeast Asia, like Kalalai. It is a male body individual, but they prefer to live as women. And also Bisus, they have both genders, like which we call these days like bisexual kind of thing. Similarly, I think. And also similar to the area like Australia, they are like Samoa and Mahu. They are like Pacific Islanders, and they have these characteristics of men and women at the same time, and they held respective positions like healer, dancers, keepers of traditions. So these were really interesting facts, which we could conclude it like LGBTQIA is not a product of Western values. It has been existed, and they were not persecuted before the colonialism. And when we talk about slavery, when we talk about racism, we normally sometimes think like the Western values free the slaves and so on. But that was not always the case. Like, especially when we talk to American atheists or American leftists or American, and random, it could be a right winger, anyone. They normally think like slavery is only limited to America. It's like only white people slave the black people and so on. But that was not always the case. You can see the slavery in Middle East. You can see the concept of slavery in Asia, in Africa as well. And it was the yellow people slavery, like doing the slavery, enforcing the slavery roles to other yellow people. You can see similarly the Middle Eastern people enslaving the white people, so on, so on. You can see a lot of things like that. So after all, slavery is not about race. It is about material exploitation. But the religions of the time, like Christianity and Islam, they never condemned slavery. If God wanted to, he could just say, there should be no slavery, end of story. But God didn't do that, even if he exists. And Christianity allowed purchasing slave. And it even set a lot of rules, like how long you can own a slave, if a slave give birth to a child, if that child become your slave or so on. A lot of these questions will answer in Bible. And also it's the same thing for Islam as well. And Islam even go fartherwards. It even degenerates more. It even justify the slave owner raping slave woman, and he just have no consequences after that. There is a case studies that I refer here. It is, you can see that in Sahih Al-Bukhari 4350. So the Prophet Muhammad sent Ali to Khalid. Ali means it is Imam Ali, who is the leader of Shia Islam these days, to bring the communists. And what happened is Ali had a sexual act with a slave girl, and Khalid saw that, and she was mad at Ali, and Muhammad say, "Do you hate him because he deserved more or he deserved better slave?" That's not a good moral standard that we hold these days. That literally at the time, the religions, they never condemn slavery. They justify it, they legalize it. That's how we could interpret. So we can see that slavery is not a product of the freeing the slaves is not a product of Western values, and also it is a product of colonialism itself, particularly the Islamist colonialism and Christian colonialism. Now we have to examine how Enlightenment values are compatible with the social justice. Immanuel Kant, in his Metaphysics of Moral, he distinguished citizens into two groups, active and passive. And he categorized women and the children, the kids, and servants. That's an interesting term. Is it meaning slave or servants? Not too sure, but he just uses servants. He used them as passive citizens because they lack civil independence. They have to rely on men, husband or father. You can see a bit of gender hierarchy there. It is, and after all, he still is a product of the time. He still believe in a gender hierarchy. He still believe in the binary gender norms. And also with marriage, Immanuel Kant had a really strange position. He thinks the husband has a right to command the household, which means the husband has a right to command the wife. That is really compatible with what Christianity was saying, what Islam was saying. The idea of how binary gender was saying, the idea of how patriarchy was saying. So we could say it was Enlightenment era. We could see a bit of reforms to the ideas of the previous centuries and previous ideas and so on, but they still are a product of their time. And Immanuel Kant also trying to defend the view that there was a sexual and racial hierarchy. At first, he was saying it is justifiable for the non-whites to be a slave to whites, but he abandoned that view afterwards. He said he's no longer believing that, but he never go away from the justification of subjection of woman to man. He always, and he till he died, he believed the subjection of woman to man. And he explicitly said that Americans and sorry, time for the N-words, but cannot govern themselves. He wrote that around that time. And he even said Native Americans were the lowest of all races, and because they were weak and impossible to teach. So that is not anti-racist view. That's for sure. That's a racist view. So we can say at the time, they were reforming, they were getting progressive, but they were not perfect, at least in our criteria. So when we talk about decolonizing the anti-woke atheists, what we are trying to say is there are a lot of people who say they are anti-woke atheists these days and trying to say we are defending the Western values. But what we are trying to say is, no, you are not defending the Western values. You are a product of Western values. And Western value is far from perfect. It is progressing. We don't have to defend it, but we don't also have to attack it as well, because it is a product of the time. We are progressing to a better view, better world. We don't have to go back to the roots. We don't have to go back to the past. So we have to educate ourselves what it means to be liberated, what it means to be free from where and liberated from where. So I would say that I was referring to an author called Chen Duqiu. He is a first generation secretary of Communist Party of China, but he's not a typical communist and so on. He was one of the person who started the free left movement around the time of 1920s. At the time when the masses in the Germany were talking about how to criminalize the homosexuals. They were talking, the Chen Chu in China, he was talking about free left movement, how homosexuals can left each other freely, and how heterosexuals can left without marriage certificates and so on. And that's a really interesting revolutionary history. And he was saying an individual should devote his effort to create happiness and to enjoy it, and also to keep it installed in society so that individuals of the future may also enjoy it. I think that is something what we need these days, because a lot of these so-called anti-woke atheists, they are trying to go back to history. They are trying to roll it back. They are trying to defend the status quo, but it is not needed. We have to go farther to the future. We have to reform it to become better. Because as I'm referenced earlier, a lot of philosophers from Age of Enlightenment, yes, they were Enlightenment time. It is far better from the Dark Ages and so on. And they will stay sexist, they will stay racist, and so on. So we should not go back to those times. We can go beyond that. We can be better. And we have to agitate well after we became educated on what it means to be liberated, what it means to be free, free from religion, free from colonialism, free from any sort of social justice, or social injustice. And the same individual, Chen Chu, he was saying that old cultures suppress and hinder the progress of democracy and science. Unless you knock it down, new ideologies cannot stand. I think that is correct, because in the past, in 1930s, the Marxism was really, how do we say, popular. And after the Stalin, it's not popular anymore, because we have seen how a lot of millions of people have died of starvations and so on. So we don't really have to have this notion of the whole ideology that will work. We have to look for a better solution. We have to look for a pragmatic solution. It's also the same for atheist movement. We have seen how new atheism has lost its ground in all over the world. We have to look for other alternatives to make sure we can assert the values. This era is the era of social justice. It is not about anti-religion. It is not about this dogma, that dogma. Yes, these are the components that we have to use. So for example, when we talk about decolonial atheism, there is a stream of atheist movement in India led by an individual called Priya Ramasamy. So in India, there is a caste system. So there is a full layer of caste. The first one is Brahmin. They are the highest. They are like the ruling class. And the lowest one were called Dalits. They were servants. They were technically slaves. They have to clean the toilets. They have to clean the sewings. They have to do all the things that normal people don't want to do. And even people like Brahmin and the higher caste, they won't touch them. They won't drink the same water. Basically, the Dalits, the lower caste people, they were not even considered as a human. They were subhumans. At the time, the Priya Ramasamy, a revolutionary or maybe a reformer, it depends on the interpreter, he tried to agitate that. He was saying, we have to self-respect to ourselves. We should know our value, because for him, it is not only about caste. It is all about labor as well. He was like, if we don't do it, these higher caste people, they have to do it. So if we agitate that, if we organize ourselves, they have no chance to win. And that's how he tried to organize it. He managed to organize a movement called self-respect movement. And that liberate a lot of Dalit people from the Hindu caste system. And there's a quote by him: if a larger country oppresses a small country, I will stand with the smaller country. If a smaller country has a majoritarian religion that oppresses minority religions, I will stand with minority religions. If that minority religion has caste system and one caste oppresses the another caste, I will stand with the caste being oppressed. If the oppressed caste, if an employer oppresses employee, I will stand with the employee. If the employee goes home and oppresses his wife, I will stand with that woman. Overall, oppression is my enemy. And there was a theory which he called political atheism in India. That is his theory in one verse. His theory was, if there is an oppression, we have to fight it. And he was known for his popular quote: say that if God is the one who oppresses you, destroy that God. That is a really good kind of atheism. He doesn't really care if God exists or not. For him, if God exists and oppress him, he would just find the God. If he doesn't exist, he don't bother about it. That's a really interesting philosophy roots in his revolutionary movement. And there were a lot of debates in India as well. As everyone might know, India has a lot of population, big populations and so on. And people like Gandhis and so on, a lot of movements in there. So there was a big debate. And Gandhi was like, he wants to keep Hindu, Muslim, and Christian faiths and seek all the Indians under one umbrella. He was trying to do the nationalist rhetoric there. But a student of Ramasamy, a student of Priya Ramasamy, he was saying that, no, we are not doing that. We would destroy all such religious faiths because we only believe in freedom from such faith and lead to social unity. He was basically saying, if we still have these labels, we will never be united. That's the kind of tradition that we could try to consider for the future of atheism movement, because we have seen how new atheism has lost its crown, especially after Hitchens passed away. Sam Harris is busy doing his own meditation stuff. Richard Dawkins has his transphobia issue going on, so even losing his prizes and awards and so on. It's not really a good thing in overall saying, but we can see a lot of these alternative kind movement of atheist movement in Global South that managed to win a lot of populations and a lot of progress in history. So due to Priya Ramasamy, a lot of Dalit people don't have to do all these steady jobs, don't have to stay away from the higher castes. They won a lot of social status these days. So in places like Tamil Nadu, currently these days, the ruling party is the representation of Dalit people. That is a really huge progress. Around 100 years ago, they couldn't touch the higher caste. They cannot drink the same water. Now they have a government in federal state. That is a really big improvement. So the idea is wokeism these days, anti-woke atheists. So what is woke? Woke means it's just against social injustices. So does it mean everyone woke is good? No, not really, because people have limited knowledge. Maybe a person might know about oppression that women suffer, but maybe only limited to the women in the developed countries. Maybe he or she might not know about the immigrant woman working dirty jobs that no one wants to do, or maybe not even getting paid with a minimum wage or so on. So that could be possible. Yes, woke are not completed, woke are not perfect, but generally the rhetoric of woke is good. It is against social injustices. Just like Nawal El-Saadawi, Egyptian atheist feminist, she once said that feminism was not invented by American women. Feminism is embedded in the culture, in the struggle of all women in the world. That is an idea that we should adopt for the future of atheism as well, especially and particularly woke atheism, which I would say, or maybe decolonial atheism or political atheism, any form of atheism. Atheism is not a product of Western values. There used to be an Indian materialist philosophy long before the myth of Jesus and the birth of Christianity. At the time, Jesus was not born yet. There was not even the Christianity existed in history. At that time, there is an Indian materialist philosophy. And you can find those evidence not only in the historical records, but also in the religious record as well. Even like Buddhism and Hinduism, when you read about them, there is an alternative history of them. Or also the proper history, like the real historical records of India, Pasha, and China region. You can see a lot of these legalist movement, materialist movement, and so on. They were atheists in a lot of sense. They don't believe in God. They don't believe in supernatural beings. They don't believe in afterlife, before born, and so on. So, and also some people think that the Western civilization is given back to atheism. It is incorrect too. Like the Western civilization, especially the colonial power, they are strong only around 1500 CE. But before that, the Persian philosophers like Ibn Rawandi and Abu Bakr al-Sazi, they were identifying themselves as atheists long before 1000 CE. So atheism existed in Middle East as well. The Western civilization prospers. So I would say the atheism, I'm just using these terms like decolonial atheism or woke atheism as a general term. I'm not trying to make a new ideology or something like that. But generally speaking, the metaphysics of these atheism is rationalism, empiricism, and materialism. Because when we give away to idealism, it will find a bit of mystical kind of believing anyway, so on. So I think we have to stay away from idealism for sure. And we have to stick to rationalism and materialism, that's for sure. And when it comes to the means of seeking knowledge, I think we should stick to reason and social justice. Because in the past, we can see the age of enlightenment and so on, they were using reason as the epistemology and materialism and so on, but they never used social justice. That's why we can see a lot of this philosopher not immune to racism, not immune to sexism, and so on. So we have to adopt that. Social justice could be a new value that we have to add to our atheism. Yeah, that's the main idea of the presentation. The whole presentation, if we have to summarize it into one sentence, it means that we have to adopt social justice as a new value to our atheism, and that is the best way to go forward. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for your talk. Before we go on to questions, I'd like to remind you that the Unitarians are very generous to provide us with this hall. And if you do have any money you could contribute, I've got a cup here, which I'll pass around. Okay, well, by popular request, if you can send me your slides, I can upload them, because that would be,
Yeah.
I think by the sound of it, people would be most interested. So yes, I can put that on the website as a link, and also the video of the talk, which Alice edits. And before we go on, I think for people that don't know you, it'd be good, before we go on to the questions, if you could just say a bit about your background, Hein, because I know you did explain last time, but for the people who weren't here, it would be interesting to know. I mean, you've got a particularly a different perspective from your background, and I think it's useful if you could just elaborate a bit on that first.
Yeah, I'm Hein Abu Bakr from Myanmar. So I'm a mixed individual with a Buddhist mother and Muslim father. So in my childhood, I witnessed my mother being forced to convert to Islam, even in the Buddhist majority country. So I didn't know about it. I was just a normal kid who just followed to mosque when my dad calls me, and follows to pagoda, a Buddhist place of worship, while my mom's called me. But I didn't know that mom's was calling me secretly because she was forcibly converted to Islam. That's when I reached around 16. That's when I started to doubt these, started to know these informations and started to doubt religions. And I tried to learn both Islam and Buddhism. And at first I was attracted to Wahhabi kind of Islam, and who takes the words literally. And then I was reading a Buddhist reformer in Myanmar. That monk was a reformist Buddhist. His views are really similar to that of how do we say, like a people like Samharis kind of thing. So he's a secular Buddhist, doesn't believe in supernatural views and so on. And he was saying some of the Pali texts were not genuine anymore and so on. So he's a reformist kind of Buddhist. And his arguments were really good. He was referring to a lot of Western philosophers and so on. I was really touched by it. And I started to I started to explore a lot of these references that he gave. He gave a lot of the authors from the Western world and like people like Sir Arnold, The Light of Asia, and so on. So I would try to read. I try to read those books and so on, and started to test with these the Western philosophies and the leftist ideas and so on. Because like around the 1940s and 50s of his age, like he was a product of that time. So there was a lot of ideas. So I also try to read a lot of books that I can see the reference list in his book. And I noticed that some of his books were censored by the Myanmar government, the military government, because he was a reformist, as I mentioned. So his Buddhism is a lot different from the, how do we say, the normal Buddhism that we can see in Myanmar. So I try to search for those books, but it is really hard to find them because they are censored by the government. So when I find them, I scan every pages and I put them into PDF file and then upload it on the website. And I was called and I was forced to sign the paper and say I will never do that again or I will go to jail. That's the intersection of me understanding the bigger context of the government oppression and the religious reformist movement and so on. So that became my main area of activism. So there are some more reformist monks in Myanmar who are like really ideologically linked to him. So I try to talk to them. I try to make sure their books are available in PDF format, so everyone all over the world can read it whenever they want, whatever they want, and so on. And I leave Myanmar around 2019, and by that time, I already made the website. I already made the Google app for those books, and the government was not really happy about it. They really hate me for that. But I was lucky. I was in Australia already when they knew about it, and I was safe. And that's the main activism. So, and I was in touch with like basically we could say I was really deeply involved in Buddhist reformist movement and Islamist reformist movement in Myanmar. And also I know a bit about the leftist movements and so on. I still consider myself as a leftist. I am mostly influenced by Christopher Hitchens when it comes to ideology and so on. Not like a dogmatic leftist, like if I have to quote him, I have to say like I didn't leave the left leave me kind of thing. So so yeah, I know about the Marxism and so on, anarchism and so on. I know about a little bit of Western philosophies, and my main activism is more about anti-censorship in Myanmar and religious reformist movement in Myanmar. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Well, it's interesting to hear that perspective. Now, I'll just make a comment or a question, or maybe you can comment on something. In your talk, I guess you were kind of elaborating the philosophical roots of atheism in some ways from various different sources. And I think that is valuable to see because atheism has a long tradition in different cultures. The only regrettable thing, it's never really got anywhere close to being more than a small minority of the population, although it seems to be increasing a little bit in Western countries, which is possibly why people may tend to identify atheism with Western culture.
Yeah, I think it is fair to say, the when we talk about the West, yes, it has its own atheist movement in the West as well, and it has to, yeah, it will stick to that. That's for sure. But when we interact with the other parts of the world, we will like interchangeably talk to each other, and we will change a lot of ideas and so on. That is good as well. And the only problem is like the receptions of that wall when it comes to atheism. For example, like when we talk about atheism in Myanmar or Malaysia or some other Asian countries, they will say, oh, atheism, secularism, they are a product of Western culture. But we have to say, no, that is not the case. It's like atheism and secularism, we have a long tradition in China, we have a long tradition in India. And these culture of China and India, they are influencing a lot of areas in like, for example, like Malaysia, Myanmar, because we are neighbor countries of them. And so that's the case when we talk about that perspective.
Yeah, I think that is certainly a useful perspective to have in putting it forward in those countries because they can easily simply dismiss atheism as being foreign to their culture unless we achieve a certain more widespread degree of enlightenment, which we still aspire to. Now, when it comes to the wokeism, it's kind of a recent term, and I find it often difficult to know exactly what it means. But yeah, it's certainly become a divisive thing, and I think being more tolerant might be the way to go with things. But the debate over these things, do you think it's a core part of trying to advance atheism, or is it something that atheists need to address, or is it just something that people can have different views about?
I think like atheism itself cannot stand alone, like ideology itself. It has to walk along with other political or maybe social beliefs. For example, atheist feminists or atheist this or atheist that. For example, like we could see that in new atheism movement, we could learn from there because after Hitchens died and especially after the Iraq War, the new atheism movement was really terrible in shape. Like when we even try to quote some Harris or maybe Richard Dawkins these days, it is not, most of the debates or most of the conversation, we are not gonna get the positive, how do we say, it's like a interchangeable conversation. That's partly because they were only considering about atheism, but they never talk about geopolitics, which the Western government have a really important role to play. And it is not their fault, that's for sure. But the problem is they cannot also ignore the big elephant in the room as well, that geopolitics is also important. That's where Hitchens would really influence me, because like my first interaction about Kurdish revolution in Kurdistan or in Rojava, that's because of him. He was wearing the small Rojava flag, the Kurdistan flag. I was like, oh, what is that flag? And I learned to know about, oh, okay, there is a revolution going on there. And his solidarity with them is not all about anti-Islam. It is more about self-determination as well. And he was trying to link with the Islamists in the Western countries. Like he was saying, the Islamists in the Western country, they are working along with the conservative leftists in the Western countries as well, like George Galloway kind of people. They are working together. Now, like even these days, we can see that. Like for example, in last election in UK, the George Galloway was trying to spread to different forms of election paper. One is for the Muslim community, one is for the normal British people. In one paper, he was saying there's only men and women, and that's pretty much it. And he was saying like he will even go and grab those shoplifting people and beat himself. That kind of messaging, that is normally a right-wing point kind of thing. And it's a conservative view for saying only men and women atheists. That is anti-woke in a lot of sense. And on the other hand, you can see a lot of Islamists saying the same thing. And for some reason, a lot of woke leftists or a lot of woke progressive in the West, they're working together with them. And who will benefit? Especially those anti-woke people, they benefit from that. That's what Hitchens was saying. Resist is why you stay can, because otherwise you cannot. That kind of messaging, I think that is what new atheism movement is lack of, because one, people like Sam Harris, people like Richard Dawkins, they only talk about anti-religion value. They never talk about geopolitics. And even when they talk about it, they don't really know much about it. So they always stand with the wrong guy for wrong reason. For example, like Hitchens was wrong on US Iraq war for the right reason, because he was against Saddam Hussein. He was against the oppression that Kurdish people were suffering. So I can understand that, because in Myanmar we have a military dictatorship. If American government offered to say, hey, we will go and bomb the military junta, we'll be happy. Like, hey, do it for us, please. Because yeah, we know it is not going to happen. It could let us do more severe result and so on. But at least we just want to be free from the dictatorship. That's kind of thing that I can understand. So I think the main point is like atheism cannot be atheist only. It has to link with something else, like atheist feminism, maybe atheist progressive, something like that.
So my question is, can you be a conservative and be an atheist? Or is atheism purely to be the preserve of the socialist?
I have read a little bit about Ayn Rand and her objectivist ideology. So when we talk about conservative, there's a really huge string of conservative ideals. Like it could be paleo-libertarian, like Trumpism. It's like a nationalist kind of conservative with a bit of libertarian idea. In that sense, I highly doubt. I'm not quite sure because I'm not I don't want to gatekeep the atheism in that sense. But people like Ayn Rand, like the objectivist movement and so on, I think they are inherently atheists as well because they are using reason as the epistemology and they are trying to understand the objective reality when it comes to the metaphysics questions. So in that sense, people like Ayn Rand, those people who believe in objectivist idea or who practice the moral values of objectivist movement, they are atheists for sure. They can be atheists for sure. But normal conservative, I'm not quite sure. It's more about individual personal belief.
So you would agree that conservative atheism is legitimate?
They could be legit, but it could be different from mine. That's for sure. Also, conservative, it means a lot of things these days too. I think the conservative could be a lot of things. So it could be social conservative or it could be economic conservative. So I think I don't want to keep that. So I think even conservative atheists are atheists in their individual rights.
Oh, thanks. And thanks, Hein. I really applaud the work you're doing in pushing back against religious extremism and suppression, repression. I think have done and are doing a great lot of work there. I do have some points of contention with your talk, many actually. So between you and I, this could be a really long conversation. So I'll just pick on one thing. And maybe before that, I'll preface it with, I think we have to avoid bundling into the notion of atheism per se, any other kind of religious or metaphysical or ethical philosophy. Sure, you can have, here in Melbourne, we have the rainbow atheists. So it's atheists who support the gay community. And you can have socialist atheists. Ayn Rand is quite an explicit atheist, so libertarian atheist. So you could match up atheism with particular things, and that's fine as long as you make it clear. But to try and bundle in some political philosophy into atheism per se, I think is a mistake. As well as trying to make atheism pro-woke or anti-woke, I think is a big mistake. And this is what really aggrieves me, because I'm seeing splits in the atheist movements and in the humanist movements, especially in the United States, splits over the woke humanists and the non-woke or anti-woke humanists, and it's splitting these movements apart unnecessarily. So let me get to my one point I wanted to make about what woke is. Now, you said woke is just being against social injustices. Well, yes, but its wokeness is about being against social injustices within a particular kind of philosophical frame. Because take the civil rights activists and the feminist activists of the 1960s in the UK, here in Australia, and in the US. They were very much strongly against social injustices. But today's woke will call them anti-woke. And why? Because they were for the Enlightenment values of having a universal moral scheme, that we have universal moral values, and that is something explicitly rejected by the woke. Now, I know that the term woke now has become watered down to what you were saying is just being against social injustices. But that's disregarding how the term woke has come about. So let me give you some strands of what woke is. It takes up the postmodernist notion of there being no objective truth, and there being objective truths is an Enlightenment notion. It's also against the Enlightenment notion of the use of reason. So for the woke, the postmodernists, they say reason is used in the service of the colonialists. So there's another characteristic of woke. Anti-universal moral values, anti-objective reason. Another one is identitarianism. A person's identity is supremely important to them. And why? Because in society, there being no universal moral values, it's this, they go with the post-structuralists, which is that there is no right or wrong. All there is power relationships. So in this power pushing between the various groups, all you have is your identity. So, which takes me another thing. It's against merit-based employment, because once again, merit is a colonial device for keeping the whites in power. So against merit, intersectionalism, which goes with identitarianism, is another factor. Critical race theory, once again going to all there is power relationships in society. Deplatforming, so it's quite repressive of free speech. It's quite repressive of free speech. You only allow the voices of the minorities who are being repressed. So here are just some of the strands of what's involved in woke. So what I'm saying is it's much, much more than just being against social injustice. And I think to try and bring atheism into this debate between the woke and the unwoke is a big mistake, because you will only fracture the atheist movement, because I've seen it, and I've seen it with the humanist movement. Thanks, Hein.
That's all right. I think you are touching a lot of good points, like especially about the universal values. My definition of woke is a bit different, because in the example that you use, in that way, I would be anti-woke. For example, like defending universal values. I would be one of those who would support universal values and against the identity politics. And also about free speech and so on, I would be pro free speech as well. So yeah, that's why I was saying like I'm more like Hitchens, like the left left me, I didn't left the left. It's like I am all for universal values. I'm against the identity politics and so on. And I'm still considering myself woke, because I'm against the oppressions that is going towards every individual. The so-called woke these days, they think when they see like, white men, they're like a top, you have to attack them. I don't believe in that. I say these men, they are still a victim of patriarchy. And yeah, white man, could be white man, but could be working class. It's like he is more oppressed than maybe a yellow millionaire in the West. How do we say is I think I don't really have like a general theory of how a person should be cancelled or deplatformed. I think it is case by case. Like he could be white, yes, but he could be working class. Right? He could be yellow, but he could be a millionaire. Or he could be, brown guy, but he could be the dictator, and so on. So I think that depends on the context.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Hein. I think we've probably reached the end of our evening today. So one point of clarification. I know that you were in Melbourne recently, and did you suggest that you might be moving to Melbourne at some stage?
Yes, I am planning to move to Melbourne in next year. I just recently got my residency, so I will go and visit my mom in Thailand around July, and then I will try to bring her for like a temporarily, like a sponsor visa, and then around next year January I will move to Melbourne. Yeah.
Okay, well, congratulations on your citizenship, and we certainly welcome you to Melbourne. I'm sure we'll be able to have many discussions in person in our atheist groups here.
Yeah.
So so once again, thanks very much, Hein.
Yeah. Thank you so much.